on any given call,
You never know what's going to happen.
any given shift,
I'm guessing it's that house on the corner we've been to.
police officers face a threat
Put the guns down.
they may never see coming.
Shots fired! Shots fired! I'm hit!
This week on Open Record,
Given the circumstances that Milwaukee is facing, excuse me,
ambushes and unprovoked attacks,
I'm being as strong as possible.
and the complexities of research aimed at protecting those
We all are in pain.
who protect us.
Squad 2253, you are now relieved from your watch.
From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I am Bryan Polcyn, and I'm joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs, sitting in a different chair
I'm
today.
on the opposite side of the table
it's
today.
Sarah is not here right now, so we have Jenna on my left, which feels unusual.
I
You're
know,
always
this is
here on
my better
right.
side anyway.
But over here we have on my right FOX6's Sam Kraemer. Sam, thank you for being here as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We are recording this episode on Thursday, July 17th. It's been 6 days now since Milwaukee police laid Officer Kendall Corder to rest. His partner, Christopher McCrae, is still recovering from gunshots as well. And just a few days after they were shot in late June, a Shorewood police officer survived a shooting thanks to his protective vest. We're going to take a deep dive into one particular aspect of both of those incidents, and they were unprovoked attacks that occurred as or immediately after officers had arrived on scene. Were these ambush attacks? Were they spontaneous shootings? What's the difference? And how can officers be trained to minimize the risk of a deadly outcome? The facts, the research, and a national expert on survival tactics for police. We'll get started on all that after this.
We're back on Open Record. For those who have not followed these recent police shootings closely, let's take some time to bring our viewers and listeners up to speed. Sam, you covered a number of these shootings. There was one starting on June 12th, the 46th in Hampton. Were you at that one?
Yeah, I was.
Afterward?
We were actually at American Family Field covering the debut of a new Brewers star when we got the call, and that's immediately, when you get that call, you have to go. And so what we learned later is that this started from neighbors that flagged down police in that area. They had provided some extra patrols in that area because of recent crimes, including some homicides. And neighbors had seen two people with guns and kind of not acting erratically, but acting irresponsibly, clearly. And they said, hey, we need help in our neighborhood. They went over this way. And eventually Milwaukee police gave chase. They tried to pull up beside them. The two men took off. And eventually they actually lead one of them into an alley near 46 in Hampton, kind of near a grocery store there, Stark Foods. And when police, are kind of zeroing in on this guy, kind of getting closer to him, he opens fire on Officer Sam Schwabenlander first. And there's some gunfire exchange. Both are hit, both survive. But nevertheless, it happens right there, right quick in an alley. And again, as soon as we get there, there's this huge, massive scene. There's blocks blocked off in both directions, and neighbors are outside wondering, has this really happened again?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting. You said you were at American Family Field for, this was Jacob Mizrachi,
Yep.
right? So superstar who's come onto the scene. That's a big enough story in Milwaukee as it is. But you said when there's an officer who's shot, you just go. There's no hesitation.
Drop everything.
Because
it
it's
doesn't matter.
not something that happens every day, or at least you hope it's not something that happens every day. But then just 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks later, at 25th and Garfield, there's another call. This time it's a man with a gun. I think it was essentially a modified rifle, essentially,
Yep.
right? AR style kind of pistol. And tell us a little bit more about that when you also were called to this scene.
Yeah, so this was kind of in the, I would say, mid-evening hours. And we've actually seen video from neighbors that were there showing this guy who's accused walking through the street. Again, hands on the modified rifle. There had been a fight, a street fight, if you will, between a couple of groups of women. And one group had a man with them as kind of as extra protection. He found out about this and kind of showed up to provide extra protection for the second group that did not have a man with them. So he's coming, and this group is inside an apartment building, again, near 25th and Garfield. And he's kind of demanding that this guy comes outside and kind of sort of face the music, so to speak. The police are called, and they are coming through. They're searching through an alley there, near 25th and Garfield. And when they are kind of going through with their flashlights, that's when police say this guy fired on them 16 times.
Wow.
The police union that night was quick to label this as an ambush. And if you look at the charging documents, I brought them
Still
here.
says in the criminal complaint this was an ambush.
Yes, but the thing that's interesting is that the police or prosecutors did interview the guy that had kind of been the protection for the first group. Or excuse me, no, it was a neighbor that was in that area who actually saw the suspect that said he saw him shortly after this happened, and he said he thought it was the guy that he was looking for the first time.
So he's claiming he didn't know it was a police officer?
That's what he says. The police union takes offense to that, truly. They said there's no way he could not have known with police arriving with their flashlights.
And this is
such.
going to come out, I'm sure, as that case progresses.
Yep.
But one of the things that we read in the search warrant affidavit is that that's where I saw this first anyway, was that this person heard him say, I thought it was dude or something like that,
Yeah.
right? I thought it was the guy who I was in this argument with or the other enforcer, but in fact it was police. But we know that just before that, someone who was with him said, I'm going to go look I'm going to go out here and look for cops. Are the cops here yet? And then flashlights from the police officer shined right at him hiding in the bush. So it certainly raises the question, how could he not have known those were police officers? But what we know for certain is, according to this complaint, that he fires the 16 shots, and 6 of them hit those 2 officers, 3 each. And one of them obviously did not survive. Officer Kendall Corder died of his injuries. That's a pretty significant thing. And for a long, long time in Milwaukee, there had not been a police officer killed. There was a 22-year span without an officer death in the line of duty. And then we had a rash of them in 2018 and 2019. 4 officers who died from on-duty incidents. Then we had 2023 Officer Peter Jerving, and now this. So it's obviously become a lot more common, sadly, tragically. But that one, there were distinctions between these two, which is, in the one case, you talk about them sort of, there's a foot chase.
Yep.
And they end up in an alley, and that's a confrontation that we hear about a lot of times. The police encounter someone, they come up to them in an alley or in some place where they're cornered, and then shots are fired. Or they order them to drop a weapon, and they point the weapon, and then they have to disable the person. This was a case on the June 26th where the officers arrive. They haven't seen anyone yet. They're looking for someone with a gun. They know it's a dangerous situation, but the shots just come
out of nowhere.
Yeah,
they come out of nowhere.
And the initial call is someone with a weapon. And so, this is not their district. They're in District 2, I believe. This happened in District 3.
That's right, yeah.
So the way the priority system that Milwaukee Police uses for calls, when it's, at a level of a high priority call, it just pulls the nearest crew. So these two, again, out of their home district, they respond. And they're just searching. It's frankly, it's kind of a searching mission. You're not sure what you're going to come across. You don't know if this person's inside or out. And then all of a sudden, he is right on top of them, and the gunshots are there. There's a video posted from somebody that just happened to be on the street, showing the 2 officers, and we now know it's McCrae just pleading with Officer Corder to just pull through. And that, I have to tell you, is one of the most sobering videos I have seen on a story I've covered in almost 10 years.
And it's not as though they hadn't been called to something like this before, right. Subject with a gun, that happens. But all of a sudden these shots come, and now you're in a situation where, to them, I'm sure it felt like an ambush. They didn't engage with anyone.
Right.
They weren't ordering anyone to drop a weapon. They just, all of a sudden, were both shot multiple times. And that's unusual. Not entirely as unusual as, we're going to talk about that in a minute, as it might seem. But just a week later,
I'm sure we all had the same reaction when we heard about another incident. It was like, again?
Yeah.
We're having this again, these poor officers.
For those who are watching or listening and aren't familiar with the Milwaukee area, Shorewood is a northern suburb, but it's adjacent to the city of Milwaukee. So it's a very close-in suburb along the North Shore, but much smaller community. And a week after the shooting involving officers Corder and McCrae, a police officer there is responding to a scene. Again, it's a situation where there is, I believe they knew going in, this was subject with a gun, right?
Yes, domestic violence related as well, which just kind of raises the senses, so to speak.
So they're responding to that. And in this case, in a squad car, haven't even gotten out of the squad car. And there's tremendous video from inside the squad car of bullets suddenly being fired, and then one pierces the windshield. And you see the glass spray, and you hear the officer cry out, "Ah!" And then shots fired, I'm hit. And before he's even gotten out of the car, before he's engaged with anyone, he's just pulling up to the scene and he's shot. Thankfully, in that case, obviously a very different outcome, right?
Yeah, he was actually taken to the hospital and released the same day, which to me is just amazing, given that video.
But it hit his vest?
Yes.
Okay.
And it would have been a lot different had it not hit the vest, is what Sherwood police told us. But again, I'm going to use that word sobering. To hear and see that video and to just fire it on in a car, again, he's just getting there. He hasn't even made contact with anyone. It says a lot about what's asked and what's demanded of the people that wear this badge.
My immediate reaction after I hear about all this is one, concern for the officers, but also concern for the community, because how are we going to get people to come and do these jobs when you have that many shootings in so many years? It's frustrating, I think, for everybody, and it should concern everybody because it comes down to public safety.
I will say, we heard, especially during the coverage of Officer Corder's funeral, a lot of people talk about the calling that it is. And I really think it was poignant when you look at the timeline of those 4 officer fatalities in Milwaukee. At the time that was going on, that's when Kendall Corder was in the academy. He was saying, I know it's dangerous. I want to do this. And of course, tragically, 6 years later, he ends up being the subject of a fatal officer-involved shooting. But he was one who looked at it and said, I get that it's dangerous. I need to give back to this community. I need to do this. And he did it anyway. But you're right, Jenna. I think for a lot of people, that could be a deterrent to go, I don't know that I want to be driving up in my squad car and just get shot before I've even engaged with a person. It's a very dangerous job. What stood out to me, though, about those last 2, and I think that's pretty obvious what we're going to talk about today, is they were situations where officers had not even engaged with a suspect. Were they, quote unquote, ambush attacks? That's debatable, something we'll talk about. Were they spontaneous, unprovoked attacks? Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, how common it is, and what police can do about that. We're going to dive into some of that when we come right back. We are back on Open Record. So once I noticed that the similarity in these 2, that these are 2 within a week, officers in our area who arrive on scene for something before they've even engaged with a suspect, they've been shot or killed, potentially injured. I wondered, how often does that happen? Are there statistics? Does anyone track this sort of thing? And there are several sources of information. And I know, Sam, you and I have been looking over some of that. But one of them is the FBI tracks, is they have something called LEOCA. It is the Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted, or I think it's killing and assault of law enforcement officers. They study this, and they actually issue a report each year looking at how many police officers have been killed in the line of duty and in what circumstances. And they use a term, feloniously killed, because of course there are accidents.
Sure.
Maybe it's a traffic accident. Maybe there's some other thing that occurs, but they actually separate out felonious killing. So someone committing a crime and killing a police officer. And over 10 years, there were more than 500 of these across the United States. 135 of them, about 1 in 4, involved an ambush or some sort of unprovoked attack. So that's a significant number. That's a lot. And then that really kind of lines up with what we've just seen here recently in Milwaukee, right?
It does. And to be honest, before you mentioned that you were going to be focusing on this on Open Record, I had no idea the level of detail or the analysis that goes into these, or even that there is a specified definition for ambush and perhaps why it matters. But the data also seems to show that while this is actually happening less often over the last several years, when it is happening, it's becoming more lethal. And that's particularly concerning to me.
Well, what you said right there is just that if you look at the numbers over time, you say, that's the big question. We've seen 2 of these. Is there an escalation of ambush style or unprovoked attacks? And again, we'll go back to the definitions here in a little bit, but there's not actually been an increase in numbers over the years. It seems fairly steady, maybe even a decline since the 80s and 90s. But as you said, if you look at the percentage of line of duty fatalities, line of duty deaths, the percentage of those that involve an ambush or an unprovoked attack has increased. So as you said, they are more lethal. So this is something that if you know that, how do you prepare for it? What do you do when you're talking about a threat that you don't even know is coming? That is really not the traditional shoot, don't shoot, sort of engagement. And we're going to talk to an expert here in just a little bit who can tell us a little bit about that. It's a complicated subject. I'll just say that, to say the least. It is not an easy one. Now, LEOCA is not the only organization that tracks this. The International Association of Chiefs of Police issued a study a little more than 10 years ago. And I thought it was interesting there because they actually separated ambush, what they called ambush attacks, into two different types. And that was entrapment or pre-planned attacks versus spontaneous attacks. And I think when we think of ambush, a lot of times you think of someone who's being lured, right? And that happens sometimes. Officers are lured to a location and then shots are fired intentionally at the police. Or maybe there's an intentional robbery or assault of a police officer that ends up becoming fatal or something like that. But they know they're attacking an officer and that's planned. A lot of times it's not that. A lot of times it is something like this where maybe he did, maybe he didn't know that those were police officers when Tremaine Jones is allegedly hiding in the bushes, but we know he shot at them and they had no idea it was coming.
They call it a crime of opportunity, right? And you don't perhaps go into it thinking you're going to do that, but when you're faced with that kind of fight or flight reflex in your mind, what are you going to do? You're going to try and protect yourself. I think that's where this crime of opportunity comes from.
Is there any research into when an officer is more likely to be ambushed, under what kind of circumstances, what they might be encountering?
That's a great question, and I think it's maybe one we can talk to our guest about here in just a little bit, because I feel like as I start to talk about this, I go, there's someone waiting to talk about all this stuff who probably knows this way better than we do, and that's a fantastic question. I have to think that police have to prepare for so many things, but this is one, if it is 1 out of 4 deaths, it's something they have to prepare for. How do you have the sort of situational awareness, and what do you do to protect yourself? What are the scenarios that put you most at risk? It's a fantastic question that you ask it, and I realize I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
But it's a good one.
Well, I'm glad. Often they work in partners. It's helpful to have someone else there, I'm sure, when these things do happen. Someone could help Officer Porter.
That is absolutely one of the things that we've seen in the research is if you operating alone certainly puts you at, and I think I read somewhere, I don't know if maybe that was in the stats here, but it is that 83%, I think, or something like 82% are alone at the time. An ambushed officer is most of the time by themselves. So obviously having partners. Now we know that's not always the case, because if you consider what happened to Officer Porter in ambush, he was with a partner. It didn't really matter. But certainly that is one of the things that could be a factor, is working in pairs rather than individually. As I talk about it, I just think to myself, maybe it's time to just take a break, and let's bring our guest in, because I think he can really answer more of this than anyone. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to be joined by an expert in all of this from the National Tactical Officers Association. The executive director, Thor Eels, will be with us right after this. We are back on Open Record, and we have a special guest joining us today. It is Thor Eels, who is executive director of the National Tactical Officers Association. First of all, I want to really thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I know this is a complicated subject, but thank you for being here on Open Record.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
I want to start with just tell us a little bit more about the organization. What is the National Tactical Officers Association, and what do you do?
So we are a nonprofit professional trade association. Our primary responsibility is providing training to law enforcement first responders to critical incidents. We have over 40,000 members from all 50 states, internationally, otherwise, and we train about 15,000 law enforcement officers on an annual basis in a variety of topics, focused on patrol response to active shooter, ambush, counter tactics that you spoke about, all the way up through hostage rescue training for tactical teams. And we also teach things such as rescue task force, tactical EMS, just a variety of topics that might be applicable to those that are first on scene in critical incidents. Originally created in 1983 by a Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department lieutenant who recognized the need to really professionalize this subspecialty within law enforcement.
Thor, you and I talked about this on the phone, but this is not the kind of subject that lends itself to a quick soundbite. It's one of the reasons why this forum is great, because we can talk in greater detail. And I know there are certain things you don't want to talk about, because you don't want to talk about some of the tactics that you're teaching officers and sort of make that public domain. But with all of that said, how do you prepare, or how do you train police officers to protect themselves from something that is so lethal like this, something they don't even see coming, which is you're arriving at the scene before you've even had a chance to assess what's going on, shots are fired?
Well, first, I want to give you and your peers a lot of credit. I mean, clearly you have done your homework and recognized the complexity and the difficulty of this particular topic. It isn't easy in training and preparing the men and women that are out there responding to these calls for service, which some you do have perhaps some degree of advance warning on the danger potential. Others come in as relatively benign initial calls for service that then tragically take a sudden turn for the worst. But you touched on a topic that I think is really kind of critical to this in terms of how we approach the training, and that is a distinction between ambush and some of the more traditional perceptions, which is this pre-planning, lying in wait, and then spontaneous surprise attack versus the spontaneity of an event and where officers are there for some reason and haven't even had opportunity to make contact with a suspect, and or they're in midst of a foot pursuit. As you were sharing one of the examples, you come around the corner and suddenly there's a confrontation and an exchange of gunfire. Those are different, and we focus on really several things. One is mindset and preparation mentally for the officers, and then the second is in the tactics. The tactics would be the thing that I probably wouldn't be speaking too much about openly, but mindset I'm happy to speak to in what we try and focus on there, and even the challenge just within that specific training block alone is tough.
I want to be clear. Nothing that we bring up here will ever be meant or to suggest that any of these officers did something that they should have had better training or they did something wrong. But when you have a fatality like this and then nearly a second one, thankfully the vest saved that Shorewood officer's life. But I think we were told a half inch to one side and it could have hit the armhole and it could have been entirely different. After that, it's natural to say, what do you do to prevent this? How do you protect officers in the future? From that mindset standpoint, what do you do when you're coming up to a scene? In these cases, they knew they were dangerous situations involving guns, involving potential for serious violence. Talk about that mindset. What should officers know that could help protect them?
Well, you are right. I mean, there's no finger pointing with regard to this, but our hope is, and one of the things that we strongly encourage and practice is, after action reviews of particular incidents for any lessons learned that might prevent or at least mitigate the potential for such a tragic outcome as the loss of the life of an officer. But having said that, our mantra, so to speak, is really instilling the mindset of expect the unexpected, maintain vigilance, have a heightened sense of your situational awareness, and focus, not allow yourself to be distracted. So that sounds relatively easy and straightforward, and yet on the other hand, you're having to balance that with a lot of what I'll say contemporary current influences that sit in the back of an officer's mind, which may not seem fair, but reality is what it is. They don't have the luxury of making a mistake. So when they're going to confront someone, or if you're walking down a dark alley and you see movement and you see somebody hiding in a bush, and maybe they're armed, maybe they're not armed, we don't have the legal authority or the luxury of acting first. So there's a vulnerability that's created there already. And then in light of, with a lot of rush to judgment on officers' actions and perceptions of excessive use of force and things like that, you have to make sure that in your mindset, if you're going to use force, that you're right in doing so, legally, morally, ethically, etc. And so sometimes that creates distractions, it creates hesitation. And so we have to address that, where we say to those that are receiving instruction that you can't allow that to override just good officer safety tactics and mindset.
To that mindset, Thor, I always wonder about the discipline that's required in that situation, because it's easy for anyone, press, audience, taxpayer, what have you, to criticize, especially the use of force after it happens. But if you're not in their shoes, in their position right there, you don't necessarily know all the factors that they were going through. So I guess I'm curious, in your training sessions, how do you preach that discipline, knowing that there is no such thing as a routine call? You can't really take a play off, as they say in sports, that you have to treat everything with the, I guess, potential that this could be upgraded to something worse.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and you're absolutely correct. One of the things that we speak to frequently is complacency. You can go to innumerable calls for service, domestic violence, robbery in progress, shots fired, et cetera, et cetera. And fortunately, the vast majority of those will end peacefully with a compliant suspect. The arrest takes place with little or no use of force, and you go on these types of calls day after day after day for years on end, and suddenly there's that one that doesn't go that way. So combating complacency is very, very, very difficult. So we talk about various stages of mindset. We have what we call like kind of a condition white, which is you're completely oblivious to your surroundings. You're just happy-go-lucky, all is well. You don't have a worry in the world. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have this condition black, which is you're in complete vapor lock, panic mode. You can't make a decision. You're really sort of frozen with fear or overwhelmed by the circumstances. Well, we want officers to be in a condition kind of yellow. It's just up from white. We don't want you to be overreactive, but we want you to be really aware. That places a tremendous strain physically and mentally on men and women that are doing this job. I mean, that's why law enforcement has a much lower life expectancy post-retirement than all other jobs. I mean, the life expectancy is anywhere from 7 to 11 years less, depending on what source of data you get from. And it's because of the higher levels of cortisol that their bodies are producing by maintaining this heightened state of vigilance. And so it's a very, very fine line of not being complacent, but not being overreactive. The one thing that we try and instill in people is they're drawn to this profession because they're service oriented. And sometimes the critics will say, well, officers end up developing this us versus them mentality, and et cetera. Well, we certainly don't want that. I mean, we are part of the community. We police and we assist and we help serve the community. And so we don't want to overemphasize this vigilant state to the extent that you do develop an us versus them attitude. But on the other hand, you can't be complacent and all trusting and create vulnerabilities to your own safety and the safety of those that you're working with.
Thor, you heard us discuss a couple of incidents we've had here in the Milwaukee area recently, and we've been talking about the term ambush. Would you describe those situations as ambushes or something else, or does that definition really matter?
Well, that's a great question as far as in terms of does it matter, in that I would say it's almost that you're splitting hairs. It's to some degree nuanced. If you look at Merriam-Webster's definition of an ambush, it really does sort of qualify to that, to attack by surprise from a hidden place. Okay, that would be an ambush. But I think Brian mentioned the IACP's study and how they went a step further and made a distinguished category of sort of the pre-planning, the premeditated, the setting a trap for law enforcement to walk into. And so the example that I use that many people are aware of right now is a actual ambush trap would be the tragic incident in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in which an individual intentionally starts a fire, draws a fire response to that, and then open fire on the firefighters from a concealed position with a rifle, killing two and injuring others. That was premeditated. It was intentional. It was done with forethought, and et cetera. So there's that aspect. These incidents that you're sharing, do they fit the actual dictionary categorization of ambush? I would say yes, but there is some question, and I don't know enough to really opine with any degree of certainty or expertise that these incidents had that premeditation component of it. There certainly were a spontaneous surprise attack on the officers without warning and from positions of concealment.
I was thinking about both of these cases because one's in the vehicle, one's outside, and I know you can't go too much into tactics, but I do wonder, like, what can you really do if you're at a scene trying to locate someone who's the subject of a call and you're flashing your flashlight around? I don't know that there's much more that you can do unless you know that person's hiding in the bushes and you position yourself in a certain way, but at that point, they don't know who is where. And I think in the car as well, he's pulling up to the scene and shots are immediately fired. And he as soon as he realizes he's hit, he drives away to another location. It seems like in some cases, is this to some degree just the danger of the job? There's sometimes just not much you can do.
Yeah, that's a good point and valid point. There are some things that we do teach on approach, whether it's vehicle or on foot. There's positioning on a single officer movement versus multiple officer movements, and how you can position yourselves in certain ways that you minimize the potential for multiple people being hit, but also maximize your ability to respond to the threat once it's identified. So we do teach those things, but there are an awful lot of things that we just don't control. And I think one of the things that tends to be frustrating to the law enforcement at times is the public often forgets that we only control 50% of any encounter or contact we have with the public, whether it's verbal, physical, or otherwise. We can do everything 100% correct and still not control more than 50% of the input into the equation as to how that contact is going to go, whether it's going to be peaceful, non-peaceful, violent, deadly, or otherwise. And so some of these are just the inherent nature of the job. And so there are several things that we talk about mitigating danger in this profession. One is our tools, such as the body armor that saved the officer's life the other day. Obviously, you can't overstate the importance of that. And then the other part is our tactics and training, the need to constantly be training and revisiting improved ways to mitigate risk and decrease the vulnerabilities that are inherent to the job.
Can we talk about the support officers need when they're out in the field? Is it important that they have a lot of support from their department back at the home base? Is it important to have a partner with you to provide support if something goes wrong? Can you talk about that team aspect of it?
Well, the answer to that is yes. I mean, you can never have too much support. Some of it I alluded to a little bit. It's very important for officers that are responding to critical incidents to believe that they have the support of their command staff, that when they're making spontaneous judgments in the field regarding their safety and the application and the use of force, that they're going to be supported in those split-second decisions. Public support is critical in knowing that what they do is appreciated and also going to be supported, and that they're likely given the benefit of the doubt on the front end. And if there's wrongdoing later, I don't know anyone in my profession that doesn't believe that they shouldn't be held accountable for intentional wrongdoing. But it is vital to their mindset that they do believe that they're going to be supported when they're making critical decisions. With regard to teamwork in the field, having a partner that you feel confident and comfortable with, who's going to be right there with you and through the thick of anything, also provides a comfort and a confidence that is often necessary to make sure that you're moving through proper decision making and employing the right tools and the tactics that you have available to you.
Thor, you mentioned the Idaho situation as a clear example of an ambush. And I remember it stood out to me because we were in our coverage for the procession. Officer Corder had just passed. They were lining the 9-mile route from the hospital to the medical examiner's office here for the first of a few processions in this process. And we're getting the push alerts that essentially the exact same thing has happened just upon firefighters. So kind of two questions here. One, how does your training, your message to firefighters perhaps differ from that to police officers? I have to imagine the lack of a weapon is something too. But second, I think from a press standpoint, from a community standpoint, we look at this reactively. But I'm curious, when you have these incidents like this across the country, how soon will you hear from departments saying, you know what, we haven't gone over this for a while, I think we should be proactive here?
Yeah, the fire service is a completely different animal, so to speak. This is an arena in which there are very, very, very few incidents of this having taken place. Now, unfortunately, the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho ambush is not the first to be perpetrated on the fire service, but those are incredibly rare. I think the fire service has done really a very admirable job in developing policies and procedures, various protocols that slow their response. They have their fire apparatus stage and wait until law enforcement has responded and ensured that various scenes are safe for them to enter into and to do things. So that's really just one of the dangers of living in an open, free society, so to speak, where if you pick up the phone and you call 911, you're going to get a response from first responders, fire, EMS, law enforcement. Somebody is going to come and provide aid. We're not likely to change that. I think, in the last few years, I travel over the country and have an opportunity to interact with departments everywhere. There is a heightened sense of awareness that certainly aggression towards law enforcement has been on the increase. I was listening to your statistics, and while the lethality of the ambushes is increased, that's certainly alarming. But just the frequency of assaults as a whole is alarming. So there is greater awareness, and we just continue to revisit this mindset of be prepared, maintain heightened situational awareness, expect the unexpected, do control the things that you can control. So, interestingly, you mentioned the Leoka report, but there was an extensive study done by cop killers years ago by the FBI in a local Leoka report. And they mentioned one of the consistent themes that came out of that was officers that were ambushed and or subsequently killed by these cop killers, they looked vulnerable. And so the takeaway from that was the bad guys that had killed officers had said, well, I saw other officers, but they looked like they had a command presence, or they looked really fit, or things like that. Those are components that we can control. And so, our physical fitness, our training, our mindset, our decision making, our mental preparation, all of those things come into play. And those are things that we should continually be revisiting and reminding ourselves of the importance that they play every single day when they walk out the door and respond to that first call for service.
Sometimes I'll have people say to me, gosh, Bryan, you have a really dangerous job. And every time I say, no, I don't, because what you're describing is just constant danger, and it really is something that there are people who choose to do this. I know you said earlier that it's a great job, and I've heard the phrase before. It's a great pension if you can stay alive to get there. But thank you so much, obviously, for the service you provide, but also for being here and sharing all of this on our podcast here on Open Record. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thor Eels, Executive Director of the National Tactical Officers Association. We're going to take a break. We will go off the record when we come right back. And it's time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question that none of us has prepared for this time, because I have it right here.
That's from Sarah?
This is from Sarah, yes. It's right here. I have to make it crinkle on the microphone. This is, it was actually dated July 9th, but I forgot to do this last week.
Okay.
So we're going to use this one this time. I have not seen it.
Okay.
Okay. What is a reasonable amount of time to reply to a non-emergency text? So that's part one. What's a reasonable amount of time?
If it's not an emergency,
Right,
I don't know, a few hours.
Okay.
I think that would be fine. I have people in my life who will take a day or two, and I have some people that respond right away. So if they respond differently, sometimes I read into that. But if it's not an emergency.
Do you feel compelled to respond, though, within
Oh, do
time?
I?
Yes.
No, I mean, I'm pretty famous for walking away from my phone for like hours at a time. So I think I'm asking for patience for me.
Okay.
Maybe
All
that's
right,
what
fair
I'm
enough.
doing
All
here.
right.
Give me some time, people.
How about you?
I would say probably 4 to 8 hours. My answer on that. I'm in my early 30s. If you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have said like probably an hour. Right. As I've gotten older, I've relaxed a little bit more, and I also realized that working in a job like this, I just can't respond to your casual text as soon as I
feel like it depends on the content. Now, number one, have they asked a question or asked for an action? Because sometimes the text you get is just hey, what's up, or how are things going, which is sort of generic. And I don't feel as compelled to respond to that right away. Or did you see this? Someone sends you, look at this recipe from TikTok or something.
Right.
My daughter will send me those sometimes, and I don't feel like I have to respond to that right away. But if someone says, hey, tomorrow night's plans, are we meeting at this time or this time? I don't think you can go too long.
But do you think you reach a point of no return? Like if you realize you didn't respond to a text and it's been 3-4 days, do you still respond? Or at some point do you just let it lie?
Yes, but here's the question. When you finally respond,
you have to explain why.
Do you make up an excuse as to why?
Oh.
Well, yeah.
Oh gosh, I thought I responded
sorry.
to this. I left. Oh, I started to respond.
I got this text at a bad moment. Yeah.
Self-deprecating always, right?
Yes.
I don't know. It depends who it is. If you really need an excuse, like if it's my wife, I'm answering as soon as possible. But if it's one of my best friends, they'll be okay. They don't necessarily need the reason.
So my mom, who is a fan of the podcast and will probably see this. Hi, Mom, if you see this, she will sometimes send me things, and we exchange for a while, and then I go away from the phone, and she sent me more stuff, and I haven't read it, and then I'll come back a day or two later and go, and by now I think she's probably figured that out, that she doesn't worry. She's like, he's busy, that's fine. But I'll come back and realize, oh my gosh, there were 3 more texts I didn't even respond.
Right.
But she doesn't ever call me on that, so thanks for not calling me out on that. But sometimes I will leave stuff unresponded to for a while. But then I feel bad. Like I feel like if someone's reached out to you, you should at least respond. Again, the question was, what's reasonable though? And that was right. Sarah went with the, do you feel the need to justify your tardiness in your reply?
Yes.
And sometimes I do.
Yeah, I just think it's good manners.
Yeah.
Right. And to show the person like you matter to me, even if this message did not.
It's a little decency. Right. It's a little decency later when you probably should have provided it earlier.
Right.
So
if anyone, I have not responded to your message yet, it's because I've been busy prepping for this podcast, or there was other things I'm going to get to. I'll get back to you real soon, I promise. Right? Yeah, okay. We're going to take a break. We will wrap things up when we come right back. That is all the time we have for today on Open Record. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Jenna, thank you. Sam, thank you. Tim Primo, running the video switcher today. Our chief photographer, Kale Zimney. Dave Machuda, who will put this whole thing together and make it look great. And with that, I'm Bryan Polcyn. We'll be back next week.